My name is Howard Wilson, 62 years old, retired high school history teacher and widower for 8 years now. I never thought my own daughter would betray me. But 10 days before Thanksgiving, I received an anonymous text message revealing something unthinkable. Jennifer and her husband Blake were planning to humiliate me at their Thanksgiving dinner, expose some fabricated truth about me, then kick me out of their lives for good. The shock nearly brought me to my knees, but instead of confronting them, I decided to change the script entirely. While I tell you how I turned the tables on their cruel plan, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you believe family secrets can run deep, but forgiveness runs deeper, life after retirement has been quietly satisfying. After teaching history and coaching football at Westfield High for 35 years, I finally hung up my whistle 4 years ago. The school threw me a nice retirement party with former students spanning 3 decades showing up to wish me well. That evening meant everything to me, seeing the impact I had made on so many young lives. These days, I have a simple routine in the suburban Boston home where Susan and I raised Jennifer. I wake at 6 most mornings for a 3-mile jog around the neighborhood regardless of weather. Susan always teased me about my stubborn dedication to running, but it clears my head like nothing else. After breakfast, I tend to my vegetable garden, which has become something of a neighborhood attraction. In Summer neighborhood, kids stop by for cherry tomatoes, which I hand out like candy. Afternoons, I volunteer at the local library 3 days a week, helping with their literacy program or simply reshelving books. The other days, I read voraciously, finally tackling the history books I never had time for while teaching. Evenings often find me grading papers for an online history course I teach for adults getting their GEDs. Retirement for me has never meant stopping work, just choosing the work that fulfills me most. The house feels big with just me in it. It is a modest 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street lined with oak trees that Susan and I bought 40 years ago, stretching our budget to the breaking point. We wanted Jennifer to grow up in a neighborhood with other children, with good schools and safe streets. Back then, the mortgage payments kept me up at night. But now, the house is fully paid off, one of the few financial advantages of my age. Susan has been gone 8 years now. Ovarian cancer took her quickly, only 7 months from diagnosis to the end. She faced it with remarkable courage, more concerned about Jennifer and me than herself, even in her final days. Sometimes I still find myself turning to tell her something before remembering she isn't there. The phantom conversations have become less frequent over the years, but they never completely stop. My relationship with Jennifer has always been complicated. When she was young, we were incredibly close. I taught her to ride a bike, helped with school projects, coached her softball team for 6 seasons. Susan joked that Jennifer was my little shadow following me everywhere and mimicking my mannerisms. Those memories remain precious to me. The distance began when Jennifer left for college at Northwestern. She studied business despite my gentle suggestion that her natural talents lay in the arts. Those 4 years changed her fundamentally. She returned home less frequently each year, and when she did visit, she seemed impatient with our simple lifestyle, making comments about upgrading the furniture or remodeling the kitchen that Susan and I could neither afford nor desire. After graduation, Jennifer moved to New York for a marketing job and met Blake Thompson at a corporate event. Blake came from old money, and worked in commercial real estate development. He was handsome, ambitious, and completely captivating to Jennifer. When they married 12 years ago at an extravagant ceremony at the Plaza Hotel, I felt like a prop rather than the father of the bride. Blake's family dominated the event, and I found myself seated at a table far from the wedding party, despite traditional protocol. Blake's influence on Jennifer grew stronger over the years. They moved to a large house in an exclusive neighborhood. Jennifer quit her marketing career to focus on charity fundraising and social events within Blake's circle. Their 2 children, Jake and Lily, now 10 and 8, have attended private schools since preschool. When they visit, they seem uncomfortable in my modest home, asking why I don't have a pool or a media room like their friends' grandparents. Our values diverged significantly over time. Jennifer and Blake focus on appearances status and material success. Conversations revolve around property investments, country club memberships, and exclusive vacations. Meanwhile, I still clip coupons from the Sunday paper and drive the same Toyota I bought 15 years ago. The gulf between us has widened with each passing year. Despite our differences, Thanksgiving has remained sacrosanct. Even after Susan died, Jennifer has insisted I join them. The invitation always feels obligatory rather than heartfelt, but I accept because it provides a connection to my only child and grandchildren. I bring Susan's famous apple pie made from her handwritten recipe, though I suspect it's never actually served at the elaborate dinner prepared by their personal chef. This year's Thanksgiving was meant to be special. Jennifer and Blake are celebrating 10 years in their Westchester mansion, a sprawling 6-bedroom estate on 3 manicured acres. They had invited 50 guests, primarily Blake's business associates and their social circle people, who wear watches worth more than my car and discuss tax shelters over cocktails. I had already resigned myself to hours of small talk with strangers, who would lose interest the moment they learned I was a retired public school teacher. Little did I know what they were really planning. The text message arrived on a Monday morning 10 days before Thanksgiving. I had just returned from my run and was enjoying coffee on the back porch when my phone chimed with a notification. Unknown number. Mr. Wilson, you need to know what Jennifer and Blake are planning for you at Thanksgiving. They're going to humiliate you in front of everyone, then ask you to leave. For good. I stared at the screen, certain it was a wrong number or some strange prank. I replied, "I think you have the wrong person," and set my phone aside. 2 minutes later, it chimed again. "This is not a mistake. Your daughter Jennifer Thompson and her husband Blake are planning to confront you at their Thanksgiving dinner on the 27th at 2 p.m. at their house in Westchester. They have been discussing this with friends for weeks." A chill ran through me, despite the warm November sun. The specificity of the details made it impossible to dismiss. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail with a generic automated message. When I texted back, asking who was sending these messages, I received an error notification. The number had blocked me. I spent the rest of the day in a fog trying to convince myself it was some cruel joke. But doubts crept in as I recalled recent interactions with Jennifer. Her last visit had been strangely formal, with Blake hovering nearby throughout. She had asked unusual questions about my will and whether I had considered downsizing from the family home. At the time, I attributed it to practical concern for my future, but now I wondered if there was something more calculating behind the inquiries. That evening, I called Jennifer under the pretense of confirming Thanksgiving details. Her voice had a strained quality I might have missed if I hadn't been listening for it. "Dad, everything is set for 2 o'clock. Business casual dress. And please don't bring anything this year. We have the menu completely planned." "Not even Mom's apple pie?" I asked, a tradition she had never previously discouraged. A pause. "Actually, we've hired a pastry chef from that French bakery in the city. Their desserts are spectacular." She cleared her throat. "This year is special, Dad. We have some important announcements to make." "Anything I should know about?" I probed gently. "Just some changes that are coming. Good changes." Her voice became artificially bright. "Blake and I have been planning this for a long time." After we hung up the knot in my stomach tightened. The following day, I decided to make an unannounced visit to their home, knowing Jennifer would be at her yoga class. Blake worked from home most days, and sure enough, his Range Rover sat in the circular driveway. He seemed surprised to see me, but invited me in with his usual polished charm. "Howard, what brings you all the way out here, midweek?" "Just in the area visiting an old colleague," I lied. "Thought I'd stop by to see if Jennifer needed anything for Thanksgiving." Blake led me to their sunroom, overlooking the professionally landscaped backyard. "Can I get you something, coffee, something stronger?" He chuckled as if we shared a private joke. "Coffee would be great," I said, noting how he checked his watch. A meeting to get to, perhaps? Or was he calculating how quickly he could send me on my way? While Blake was in the kitchen, I heard his phone ring on the side table. Out of character for me, I glanced at the screen. The caller ID read, "Richard's Law Firm." Blake returned before I could ponder the significance. We engaged in small talk about the Patriots' season and Jake's hockey team. I mentioned Thanksgiving, trying to gauge his reaction. "It's going to be quite an event this year," Blake said, a gleam in his eye that made me uneasy. "We've been working on something big, a real game changer, if you will." "Sounds intriguing," I replied casually. "Jennifer mentioned announcements." Blake's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, some long overdue changes. Nothing to worry about." He glanced at his phone. "I actually have a call in 5 minutes. Business never stops. You know." As Blake walked me to the door, his phone rang again. "Here." He excused himself to take it in the hallway, but I could still hear snippets as I lingered in the foyer. "Yes, everything's on schedule for Thanksgiving. The old man doesn't suspect a thing. Finally getting rid of that last obstacle. The property will be available by January, guaranteed." My blood ran cold. I left quietly. Blake still on his call, unaware I had overheard. The anonymous text was beginning to seem alarmingly credible. My next stop was to see Sarah Miller, Jennifer's roommate from Northwestern, and one of her few friends from before Blake. Sarah had always been kind to me, inviting me to dinner when I visited Jennifer in college, sending me birthday cards, even after Susan passed. If anyone might know what was happening, it would be Sarah. I found her at the small art gallery she owned in the city. When she saw me, her expression shifted from welcome to something like guilt. "Howard." "What a surprise," she said, hugging me briefly. "What brings you here?" "I think you might know," I replied quietly. "I received some disturbing information about Thanksgiving at Jennifer's." Sarah's face fell. She locked the gallery door and flipped the sign to "Closed for lunch." "I was afraid of this," she sighed, leading me to a small seating area in the back. I told her this plan was cruel and unnecessary. "So it's true?" I asked, my worst fears confirmed. Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Jennifer thinks she's found proof that you were unfaithful to Susan throughout your marriage. She claims to have letters between you and someone named Margaret." The name hit me like a physical blow. Margaret Collins had been a fellow teacher at Westfield, an English instructor who started the same year I did. We had been close friends, serving on committees together, occasionally carpooling when our schedules aligned. Susan had indeed been jealous of our friendship at times, though there had never been anything romantic between us. "That's absurd," I said firmly. "Margaret was a colleague and friend, nothing more." "There's more," Sarah continued, not meeting my eyes. "Blake has been pushing this confrontation. He wants your house, Howard. He's planning some development in your neighborhood, and your property is the last piece he needs." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The questions about downsizing, the sudden interest in my financial planning. "They're going to confront you publicly at Thanksgiving with all those witnesses present. Blake thinks it will pressure you to sign over the property on the spot to avoid further embarrassment." Sarah reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry, Howard. I tried to talk Jennifer out of it, but Blake has her completely convinced this is justified. And you sent the text? I asked. Sarah shook her head. Not me, but Jennifer has discussed this plan with several people. Could be anyone in their circle who still has a conscience. I thanked Sarah for her honesty and left my mind reeling. My own daughter plotting to humiliate me for financial gain using fabricated infidelity as justification. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. The drive home passed in a blur as memories flooded back. My marriage to Susan had been strong, but not without challenges. We met in college, married young, and grew together through the lean early years of my teaching career. Susan worked as a nurse until Jennifer was born, when she decided to stay home for a few years. The postpartum period was difficult for her. Susan struggled with depression that went largely untreated in an era when such things weren't openly discussed. I took on extra coaching duties to make ends meet, leaving her alone with an infant more than either of us wanted. We argued about money, about division of responsibilities, about the future, but we always found our way back to each other. Margaret entered the picture when Jennifer was 4. She joined the Westfield faculty, a bright, energetic English teacher with innovative ideas that revitalized the department. We worked together on curriculum development, chaperoned school dances, and occasionally met for coffee to discuss educational philosophy. Our friendship was intellectual and supportive, nothing more. Susan did question the relationship once or twice, especially during a period when she found motherhood particularly isolating. "You light up when you talk about her ideas," she had said once. "Do you ever wish I was more like her?" I had reassured her truthfully that Margaret was a valued colleague, but Susan was the only woman I had ever loved. As I pulled into my driveway, a deeper, more painful memory surfaced, one I had tried to keep buried for decades. The real secret was not about Margaret at all. It was about Jennifer. When Susan was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, we had many difficult conversations about what would happen after she was gone. One night, during a particularly honest discussion, we revisited the question of whether to tell Jennifer the truth about her birth. Jennifer was not our biological child. We had adopted her as a newborn after years of infertility and failed treatments. Her birth mother was a 19-year-old college student who had made an adoption plan, wanting her baby to have opportunities she couldn't provide. The adoption was closed, as most were in that era, though we had non-identifying information about the birth parents. We had always planned to tell Jennifer when she was old enough to understand, following the advice of adoption counselors. But the right moment never seemed to arrive. When she was little, it seemed unnecessary to complicate her world. During her tumultuous teenage years, we feared adding to her identity struggles. By college, the secret had been kept so long that revealing it felt increasingly difficult. Susan, facing her mortality, had wanted to tell Jennifer before she died. "She deserves to know who she really is," she had insisted from her hospital bed. I had agreed to have the conversation together, but Susan's condition deteriorated rapidly. She slipped into a coma before we could find the right moment and died 3 days later. In my grief and Jennifer's, I couldn't bring myself to add the shock of her adoption to her pain of losing her mother. I told myself I would tell her later when she had healed somewhat from Susan's death, but days became months and months became years, and the right time never presented itself. Jennifer drifted further into Blake's world, and the gulf between us widened. Now, sitting in my silent house, I realized my well-intentioned silence had created the very situation Susan had feared. Jennifer had found partial information and misinterpreted it catastrophically. I went to the basement to boxes I hadn't opened in years. In a plastic bin labeled "Susan Personal," I found what I was looking for. Her journals, our adoption paperwork, letters from Jennifer's birth mother that had been forwarded through the agency, and a sealed envelope addressed to Jennifer in Susan's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened Susan's final journal. There, in her familiar script, were entries from her last months. Worried about telling Jennifer the truth. Howard thinks she'll understand, but I fear she'll feel betrayed that we kept it from her so long. What if she thinks our love wasn't real because she wasn't ours biologically? Nothing could be further from the truth. She has been our miracle from the day we brought her home. Further in a more disturbing entry. Found Jennifer looking through old papers in the study today. She seemed strange when I came in. Guilty almost. What did she find? The adoption papers are in the fireproof box, but there are letters from Margaret about the school adoption awareness committee that could be misinterpreted, if read without context. Should I address it directly? Howard says, wait until I'm stronger. But time is not on my side. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by these artifacts of our family history, and realized what had happened. Jennifer must have found letters related to the adoption committee, a group Margaret had chaired, that provided educational resources about adoption to schools. Without context, mentions of adoption, birth mother, and biological origins could easily be misinterpreted as evidence of an affair, especially by someone looking for reasons to justify taking my home. The sealed letter from Susan to Jennifer confirmed my suspicions. Inside was a loving explanation of Jennifer's adoption story, written when Susan knew she might not survive to tell it in person. She had prepared this truth with such care, such tenderness, only for it to remain unshared all these years, due to my cowardice. I had failed both Susan and Jennifer by keeping this secret. Now, I had to find a way to reveal the truth, but on my terms, not as part of Blake's orchestrated public humiliation. For 3 days following my discoveries, I cycled through every emotion imaginable. First came rage, a burning anger I hadn't felt since an opponent coach deliberately injured one of my football players decades ago. I imagined confronting Jennifer and Blake at their elaborate Thanksgiving, exposing their scheme in front of their carefully cultivated social circle. The fantasy brought momentary satisfaction, but no real solution. The anger gave way to profound hurt. Regardless of the misunderstanding about her birth, Jennifer had been willing to humiliate me publicly, to cast aside decades of love and sacrifice for financial gain. Had I failed so completely as a father that she could justify such cruelty, the thought kept me awake for 2 consecutive nights. Sadness followed a heavy blanket of grief for what our relationship had become. I looked at old photographs of Jennifer as a child, her gap-toothed smile, and arms thrown around my neck at the beach at Disney World at her high school graduation. Where had that loving connection gone? I mourned its loss as deeply as I had mourned Susan. Through these emotional storms, I still had to decide what to do about Thanksgiving. A simple cancellation wouldn't suffice. Jennifer would just reschedule her ambush. Confronting them directly would likely devolve into accusations and denials, with Blake controlling the narrative. On the 4th day, I called Margaret Collins, now retired in Vermont. We had remained in occasional contact over the years, holiday cards, and the rare lunch when she visited Boston. After explaining what Jennifer believed, Margaret was appropriately appalled. "That's absolutely ridiculous, Howard. We never even held hands, let alone had an affair." Her indignation turned to sadness. Poor Susan would be heartbroken to see Jennifer twisted like this. And that Blake character using her confusion for his real estate schemes, that's simply despicable. Margaret offered to write Jennifer directly to clear up the misunderstanding, but I declined. This situation required more than just correcting the record about one aspect. Next, I visited Father Michael at St. Catherine's, where Susan and I had attended for 40 years. Though I had become less regular in my attendance since her death, he welcomed me warmly and listened without judgment to the complicated situation. His advice was thoughtful. Sometimes, Howard, the most powerful response to cruelty is not confrontation, but transcendence. What would truly honor Susan's memory in this moment? His question clarified my thinking. Susan would not want a public spectacle that would damage our family irrevocably. She would want the truth revealed with love, and she would want me to rise above the pettiness rather than sink to its level. I decided against attending Thanksgiving at Jennifer's house. Instead, I would spend the day in service to others, while ensuring Jennifer received the full truth about her adoption in a way she couldn't ignore or misinterpret. Over the next week, I prepared methodically. First, I wrote Jennifer a lengthy letter explaining the complete history of her adoption. I included copies of the original adoption paperwork photos of Susan and me at the adoption agency, and the sealed letter Susan had written before her death. I didn't minimize our mistake in not telling her sooner, but explained it came from a place of love and uncertainty, never deception. Next, I visited my lawyer and revised my will. While I had previously left the house and most assets to Jennifer, I now designated the majority to a foundation supporting foster care and adoption services, with provisions for educational trusts for Jake and Lily. Jennifer would receive Susan's jewelry and personal mementos, plus a modest cash inheritance. If Blake wanted my property, he wouldn't get it through inheritance. I contacted the downtown community center, where I occasionally volunteered, and signed up to help serve Thanksgiving dinner to homeless and low-income residents. When they learned I was available all day, the coordinator was delighted, as they were short-staffed for the holiday. I also invited Margaret several retired teaching colleagues and a few former students who I knew had no family gatherings to attend. We would create our own Thanksgiving celebration of service and friendship after the community meal was served. Finally, I placed all the adoption documentation, my letter and Susan's letter, in my bedside drawer, where Jennifer had snooped in the past when visiting. She had a habit of checking my medicine cabinet and drawers, ostensibly to ensure I was taking proper care of myself, but likely looking for signs of decline she could use to suggest assisted living. The evening before Thanksgiving, I turned off my phone, prepared a small overnight bag, and went to bed early. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, knowing I had found a response that honored Susan's memory while protecting my own dignity. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect late November day in New England. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat watching the pink light spread across my frost-covered garden. There was a strange serenity in knowing I had taken control of an impossible situation. At 7, I drove to the downtown community center, where preparations for the community meal were already underway. The industrial kitchen buzzed with volunteers chopping vegetables, roasting turkeys, and preparing massive trays of stuffing and potatoes. The coordinator, Diane, assigned me to turkey carving, knowing my steady hands from years of preparing lab specimens for biology classes. As I worked alongside other volunteers, many of whom had their own reasons for avoiding traditional family gatherings, I felt a genuine sense of belonging that had been missing from Jennifer's stilted holiday events. We shared stories and jokes, the camaraderie growing as the dining room filled with guests around noon. When the serving began, I found myself at the turkey station filling plates for a stream of grateful people. Many were obviously homeless, some were elderly people living alone, and others were families struggling to make ends meet. Each thank you, each smile, each a moment of human connection washed away more of the hurt Jennifer's betrayal had caused. Margaret arrived around 1:30, bringing additional pies from a local bakery. She joined me on the serving line, our decades-old friendship requiring no explanation to others. A few of my former colleagues and students filtered in throughout the afternoon, some helping serve others, simply joining the community meal. It wasn't until nearly 4 o'clock that I turned my phone back on. The screen immediately lit up with notifications. 15 missed calls from Jennifer, starting at 1:45 p.m., progressively more frequent and urgent. The voicemails followed a telling progression. "Dad, just checking when you're planning to arrive. We have appetizers out now." Her voice was casual, but tight. "Dad, people are asking about you. Please call me when you get this. Dad, it's after 3. Dinner is being served. Where are you?" Now there was obvious tension. "Dad, this is completely irresponsible. You knew how important today was. Call me immediately." The final message, left just 20 minutes earlier, was barely controlled fury. "How could you do this to me? You've ruined everything. Blake is furious. You need to call me right now." There were also several text messages escalating in similar fashion, from inquiry to outrage. I showed the phone to Margaret, who shook her head sadly. "She's more upset about her ruined plan than about your absence. That tells you everything," she observed. As we were cleaning up after the community dinner, Jennifer called again. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Dad?" "Where the hell are you?" Her voice was shrill, a blend of anger and something else, perhaps fear. "I'm volunteering at the downtown community center," I replied calmly. "We've just served Thanksgiving dinner to 300 people. What?" "Why would you? Our dinner was hours ago. Everyone has been asking where you are. I had to make excuses for you. I'm sorry if I caused you embarrassment, Jennifer," I said, surprising myself with how sincerely I meant it. "But I received information about what you and Blake were planning for me today." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What are you talking about?" "I think you know. The public confrontation, the accusations about Margaret, the demand for my property. I decided not to participate in that particular drama." A long silence followed. Then, in a smaller voice, "How did you find out? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you were willing to humiliate me based on a misunderstanding you never bothered to discuss with me privately." "Misunderstanding?" "I saw the letters, Dad. All those years while Mom was at home with me, you were—" I cut her off gently. "Jennifer, go to my house. The spare key is in the usual place. When you get there, look in my bedside drawer. Read everything you find there. All of it. Then call me if you still want to talk." What I'm not going to. If you want to understand the truth, that's where you'll find it. I'll be home around 8. I paused, then added, "I've always loved you, Jennifer. Nothing will ever change that." I ended the call before she could respond, handed my apron to Diane, and joined my small gathering of friends for our own Thanksgiving meal in the community center's staff room. We had arranged a potluck with Margaret bringing her famous sweet potato casserole and others contributing their special dishes. It was modest compared to the elaborate feast at Jennifer's, but filled with genuine warmth and connection. As we ate, I shared some of my situation with this trusted circle. Rather than judgment, I received understanding and support. One former student, now a family therapist, offered particularly helpful perspective. "Secrets in families are like landmines. Howard," she said, "they stay buried until someone steps on them, and then the explosion affects everyone nearby. But it's never too late to begin healing if there's willingness on both sides." I hoped she was right that healing was possible once Jennifer learned the truth. But I also recognized that Blake's influence and his financial motives complicated matters significantly. Around 7:30, I thanked everyone for their companionship and headed home, unsure whether Jennifer would have taken my suggestion to read the documents. As I turned onto my street, I saw her Mercedes parked in my driveway, and my heart began to race. I found Jennifer sitting at the kitchen table, the adoption papers, letters, and photos spread before her. Her makeup was smeared from crying, her carefully styled hair disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. She looked up as I entered her expression, a complex mix of shock, anger, and confusion. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I set my keys down and took the chair across from her. "We were going to. Many times. When you were little, we read all the books about how to explain adoption appropriately. But we kept waiting for the perfect moment. For 37 years. The hurt in her voice was palpable. I shook my head. "We thought we had time. Then, when your mother got sick, she wanted to tell you together. She even wrote you that letter." I pointed to Susan's envelope, now opened on the table. But she declined so quickly at the end. After she was gone, I couldn't add to your grief. And then it seemed too late. Jennifer held up one of the letters from the adoption committee. "So these weren't love letters between you and this Margaret person Blake was so sure." "Blake saw what he wanted to see," I said firmly. Margaret Collins was my colleague and friend. She chaired the school's Adoption Awareness Committee, which provided resources to students who were adopted or considering placing children for adoption. Nothing more. Jennifer covered her face with her hands. "Oh, God, what have I done?" Her shoulders began to shake with sobs. I moved to the chair beside her and hesitantly placed my hand on her back. She didn't pull away. "Blake convinced me you had betrayed Mom for years," she said between sobs. "He found these letters when we were helping you organize the basement last year. He said it explained why you were always working late, why you and Mom argued sometimes. He made it seem so obvious." "And the plan for Thanksgiving?" I prompted gently. She looked up, shame evident in her reddened eyes. "Blake said we should confront you publicly, that the social pressure would make you admit everything. And yes, he wanted your house. He's been trying to assemble all the properties on your block for some mixed-use development." She wiped her eyes. "He made it sound like justice, like I deserved your property as compensation for your betrayal of Mom." "And you believed him?" I said, not as a question, but as a sad confirmation. Jennifer nodded miserably. "I wanted to believe him. Things haven't been great between us lately. Blake lost some important deals this year. He's been drinking more, pressuring me about money. This development was going to solve everything." She looked at the adoption papers again. "But I never knew. I never imagined this was the real story." "How did it go today, when I didn't show up?" I asked, curious despite myself. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Disaster. Blake had arranged for a real estate attorney to be there with papers ready for you to sign. When you didn't arrive, he got increasingly agitated. Started drinking heavily before dinner. When I told him about our phone call, that you somehow knew about the plan, he completely lost it. Started accusing me of warning you. We had a huge fight in front of everyone." She shuddered at the memory. "Most of the guests left before dessert." I should have felt vindicated, but instead I just felt sad for all of us, caught in this web of misunderstandings and manipulations. "Where are Jake and Lily?" I asked, suddenly, concerned about my grandchildren witnessing such a scene. "With Blake's sister for the weekend, thank God." She traced her finger over a baby photo of herself that she'd found among the adoption papers. Was I wanted? My birth mother, did she?" "Very much wanted," I assured her quickly. "Your birth mother was a college student, just 19. She specifically chose us because I was a teacher. She wanted you to have a stable home with opportunities she couldn't provide then. There are letters from her in that folder." I pointed to a blue file she hadn't opened yet. "She was very thoughtful about her decision. It was never about not wanting you." Jennifer pulled the folder toward her, but didn't open it yet. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. "You're the same person you've always been," I said. "Our daughter. Susan's and mine. The fact that we didn't share DNA never mattered to us, not for a single moment." She was quiet for a long time, processing all she had learned. Finally, she asked, What happens now? It was a complicated question with no easy answer. The breach of trust was significant on both sides, though, from vastly different motivations. I had kept a fundamental truth from her out of misguided protection. She had planned to humiliate me out of misguided vengeance and financial gain. That depends on what you want, Jennifer. I can forgive the plan against me, especially now that I understand you believed you were justified. But I need to know if you're willing to look honestly at what your life with Blake has become. She flinched at his name. He's still at the house making calls trying to salvage the deal without your property. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. When I left to come here, he told me not to come back without signed papers or a commitment from you. And what do you want? I pressed gently. I don't know anymore. Tears welled in her eyes again. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my marriage, it's all shifting under my feet. I stood and put on the kettle for tea, a habit Susan had instilled in me for difficult conversations. As the water heated, I cleared the papers to one side of the table, giving us both a moment to collect our thoughts. You don't have to decide everything tonight, I said, setting a mug of tea before her. You're welcome to stay here if you need time away from Blake. Jennifer looked around the kitchen, taking in the familiar surroundings of her childhood home, unchanged in many ways since she'd lived here. Maybe just for tonight, she said quietly. I need to think. And so began the slow, tentative process of rebuilding. Jennifer slept in her old bedroom surrounded by the high school pennants and bookshelves that we had preserved after she left for college. I lay awake much of the night, alternating between hope that we might find a new foundation for our relationship and concern about what Jennifer would face with Blake. I needn't have worried about the latter for long. Blake's true colors emerged with stunning clarity the next morning. Jennifer woke early, joining me for coffee on the back porch, despite the November chill. We sat wrapped in blankets watching the neighborhood come alive, neither of us quite ready to continue last night's heavy conversation. The momentary peace was shattered by her phone ringing. Blake's name flashed on the screen. She answered on speaker, perhaps wanting me to witness whatever came next. Hello? Where the hell have you been? Blake's voice was tight with controlled fury. You didn't come home last night. Are you with your father? Did you get the papers signed? Jennifer took a deep breath. I'm at Dad's, yes. But there won't be any papers, Blake. I know the truth now. About everything. What truth? What are you talking about? His tone shifted to something calculating. I know about my adoption. I've seen all the documentation. There was never any affair with Margaret. That was a committee about adoption resources for schools. A long pause followed. So, what? That doesn't change anything. The development deal is still our priority. We're still going ahead with this, Jennifer. Our priority or yours? She challenged, a strength in her voice I hadn't heard in years. This wasn't about justice for my mother. It was always about the property. Don't be naive, Blake scoffed. Of course it was about the property. It's worth millions as part of the development. Your father's sitting on a gold mine he doesn't even appreciate. He'd rather grow tomatoes than contribute to progress. Jennifer's hand tightened around her coffee mug. It's his home, Blake, where he raised me, where my mother died. It's not just real estate. Everything is real estate, he snapped. Wake up, Jennifer. This sentimental garbage is exactly why I had to take matters into my own hands. Your father was never going to sell willingly. We needed leverage. So you manipulated me, she said flatly. Used my feelings about my mother to set up my father. Blake's laugh was cold. It wasn't hard. You've always had this chip on your shoulder about him even before I met you. Always complaining he wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't sophisticated enough. I just utilized what was already there. I watched the color drain from Jennifer's face as she confronted the ugly truth of her marriage. "What about our family, Jake and Lily?" she asked. "What about them? They'll have a better life when this deal goes through. More opportunities, better connections." His voice hardened again. "Look, this little crisis of conscience is touching, but we have investors waiting. Come home now, and we'll figure out another approach." Jennifer met my eyes, something resolving in her expression. "I don't think I will be coming home today, Blake." "What does that mean?" His voice rose sharply. "It means I need time to think about everything. Our marriage, our values, what I want to teach our children." "Don't be ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built." "What have we built exactly?" she asked quietly. "A life of appearances, relationships based on utility rather than caring. I'm not sure that's what I want anymore." Blake's response turned threatening. "If you're not home by dinner, don't bother coming back at all, and you can forget about seeing Jake and Lily." I couldn't stay silent at that. "That's not how custody works, Blake. You don't get to use children as bargaining chips." "Howard, should have known you were listening, enjoying turning my wife against me. Old man, your behavior is doing that quite effectively without my help," I replied evenly. Blake launched into a tirade about lawsuits and financial ruin threats against both Jennifer and me. She ended the call mid-sentence, her hand shaking, but her expression determined. "I'm sorry you had to hear all that," she said. "But maybe I needed to hear it to truly understand what my life has become." The next few days unfolded with dizzying speed. Jennifer returned home briefly to pack essentials while Blake was at his office, then came back to stay in my guest room. Blake left increasingly desperate, then angry, then pleading voicemails. He showed up at my door twice, once drunk and belligerent enough that I had to threaten to call the police. Jennifer contacted a divorce attorney recommended by Sarah. She arranged to see Jake and Lily at Blake's sister's house, a neutral location where Blake couldn't create a scene. She began the painful process of explaining to them in age-appropriate ways that Mommy and Daddy were taking some time apart to figure things out. Meanwhile, we continued our conversations about her adoption, filling in the blanks of her history. She read every letter from her birth mother, Tracy, who had gone on to finish college and become a veterinarian in Colorado. The letters stopped when Jennifer was 10, as was common in semi-open adoptions of that era, but they provided valuable insight into the young woman who had made such a momentous decision. "Would it be possible to find her?" Jennifer asked one evening as we sorted through more family photographs, this time with full context and honesty. "If you want to," I said. "There are registries for adoptees and birth parents who are open to contact. We could start there." The "we" wasn't lost on Jennifer. She smiled the first genuine smile I'd seen since before Thanksgiving. "I'd like that. Not to replace Mom, never that. But to understand more of where I came from." "Susan would approve," I told her. "She always said you had a right to know your full story when the time was right." Those weeks weren't easy. Jennifer fluctuated between certainty about separating from Blake and doubt about dismantling the life she had built. Blake alternated between vicious legal threats and pathetic attempts at reconciliation. The children were confused and upset, though they seemed to enjoy spending more time at my house discovering the simple pleasures of helping in the garden and baking cookies from scratch. Through it all, Jennifer and I rebuilt something we had lost years ago. Honest communication. We talked about Susan, about the mistakes we had both made, about our regrets and hopes. There were difficult moments and painful revelations, but each one cleared away more of the debris that had accumulated between us. Blake's development deal collapsed when his investors learned he couldn't secure the entire block as promised. His financial situation, it turned out, was far more precarious than Jennifer had realized. Years of leveraging one property to finance another had created a house of cards that began to tumble. By the time Christmas approached, Jennifer had filed for divorce and secured a temporary custody arrangement, giving her primary care of Jake and Lily. She found a modest apartment near my house, close enough that the children could walk between our homes. She also began exploring a return to her original career in marketing, reaching out to former colleagues who remembered her talent. 3 months after the Thanksgiving that wasn't, we decided to host a different kind of family dinner. Jennifer and the children had settled into a new routine. Blake had moved to Chicago to work for his uncle's firm, his local reputation tarnished by both business failures and personal behavior. Jennifer had tentatively contacted her birth mother through an adoption registry and received a warm emotional response. Our gathering included Margaret, who had become a regular visitor and valued friend to Jennifer once the misunderstanding was cleared up. Sarah came bringing her new girlfriend, whom Jennifer genuinely liked. A few of my teaching colleagues rounded out the group, creating an eclectic but harmonious chosen family. The dining room table extended to its full length couldn't have been more different from the formal Thanksgiving setting at Jennifer's former home. Mismatched plates, simple homemade food. Children allowed to giggle and occasionally leave the table conversations that meandered from serious to silly, all created an atmosphere of authentic connection. As I looked around at these people who had helped us weather the storm, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Jennifer caught my eye from across the table and smiled a silent acknowledgement of how far we had come. Later, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Jennifer joined me on the back porch, now pleasant in the mild spring evening. "I've been thinking," she said, wrapping her cardigan around herself. "Maybe we should write a book together." A book? I was surprised by the suggestion. She nodded. About our experience, about family secrets, adoption, misunderstandings, reconciliation. I think it might help other families avoid the mistakes we made. I considered the idea. It would mean being very vulnerable, sharing our failures along with our eventual path to healing. "Isn't that the point?" she asked. "To show that even when everything seems broken beyond repair, there can be a way forward, if there's enough love and willingness to be honest." Her insight moved me deeply. This was a Jennifer I hadn't seen in many years, thoughtful and compassionate, more like the young woman who had wanted to change the world through meaningful work before Blake's influence redirected her ambitions. "I'd be honored to write it with you," I said. She reached over and took my hand, another gesture that had become natural again after years of distance. "Thank you, Dad, not just for this, but for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." "That's what parents do," I replied simply. "We keep loving, keep hoping, even through the hard parts." "Mom would be proud of us," Jennifer said softly, "for finally getting to the truth, for finding our way back to each other." I squeezed her hand. She always believed we would. Then, as if on cue, Jake appeared at the door in his pajamas, his sister peering around him. "Grandpa, Mom, can we have the story about great-grandma's apple pie recipe again? Lily doesn't remember it." Jennifer laughed. "Of course. Come sit with us." As the children settled between us on the porch swing, Jennifer began the familiar tale of Susan's grandmother, teaching her the secret to perfect pie crust. Jake and Lily listened with the rapt attention children give to family stories, connecting them to a past that shapes their identity. In that moment, I felt Susan's presence strongly, as if she were nodding in approval at this scene of healing and connection. The truth finally shared and accepted had set us all free to be a real family again, imperfect, but authentic in our love for one another. Thanksgiving had always been about gratitude, but never before had I understood so deeply how much we had to be thankful for even emerging from our darkest moments. The betrayal that could have destroyed us had ultimately become the catalyst for rebuilding something stronger and truer than what we had lost. Have you ever experienced a family secret that changed everything when it came to light? Or found that what seemed like the worst betrayal actually opened the door to healing? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of forgiveness and rediscovery resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more true life experiences that remind us second chances are always possible. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that even the most broken relationships can be mended with honesty and love. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the most difficult truths become our greatest opportunities for growth.